Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keith Fleming. This is the Daily Fix Show on the Fantasy and Frames podcast. With me, as always, the man that I lovingly call Joe the Brain Mats. Joe, we are less than a week away from meeting in person, going to the
We are.
Senior Bowl. I am frigging jacked, my friend.
Yeah, I get to. I also get to go to Alabama for the first time, so that'll be
Well, that's
something
nothing to
I.
write home about.
Yeah, I
Trust
was gonna
me.
say something I didn't otherwise have planned. No offense to any listeners who are in Alabama, if you happen to be, but you probably also know. So
We used to joke because we go to a lake in Alabama and have for a long time called Lake Wedowee. And you knew you were in Alabama because literally you would go from a paved road to like rock gravel the second you crossed Alabama line. And it's just like this stuff writes itself. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Alabama or the Senior Bowl. We're here to help you get ready for DFS for the conference championship weekend. Bittersweet, Joe. I hate this time of the year because it means football season. We've only got 3 games left, which is kind of depressing. But I would argue that Conference Championship Sunday is better than the Super Bowl, the best Sunday of the NFL season, because typically you have 4 of the best teams in the NFL, 2 trips to the Super Bowl on the line. I mean, you can't ask for better matchups than you got this year. I think they got it right, too. It's the 4 best teams.
yeah, I think so too. Normally, I say the best weekend for football is the divisional round because
So
you
many
get rid
games.
of some of the weaker teams from that first round. Again, the 2-7 game, once they've added that, has historically been awful. And then this year, the divisional round was a pretty big letdown, honestly. You had, one not too shocking blowout with my Giants getting wiped off the field.
I wasn't going to bring it up. You did.
But yeah, I mean, Dallas, San Francisco was competitive, but that was a game where last week we had our differences on some of the defensive type games we get. That game was kind of sloppy, at least on Dallas's end. But yeah, this year, I really think when you look at these 4, it would not be remotely surprising to see any one of these 4 lifting the Lombardi Trophy 2 weeks from Sunday, because yeah, they're very evenly matched. I mean, I think Cincinnati, I believe, is now favored against
They're
Kansas
the best
City.
all-around team, I think, left. The
Ooh,
other teams
that's
have a
interesting.
glaring weakness, I think, to where I think you can argue that
Wait,
Cincinnati is just
what?
solid across the board.
That's
Maybe
interesting.
kicker
I mean,
would be the one thing that, because
oh,
McPherson has
I
not
like
been
their
as
kicker.
great. I do too, but he has not been as great this year as he has been last year.
Well, we'll
But
get into this eventually, but there is one kicker this year who I think you can maybe bank on his previous seasons being more predictive for this Sunday, but who's been a letdown. But in general, I actually think the NFC teams have, at least roster wise, I think they're stronger top to bottom. I think defensively, I think those 2 teams are on a different level than Kansas City and Cincinnati. But I also think if you have a healthy Mahomes 2 weeks from now, or if you have Joe Burrow, you feel better. You feel more confident than Hurts and especially Purdy, as well as he's played.
yeah,
So
you
yeah, I think
should.
this is a total toss-up. So I'm very excited. I'm sure I'm going to lose money gambling on it because it's a total toss-up, but it's going to be fun to watch.
All right, before we get into our conference championship plays, I want to plug our YouTube channel. That is the Fantasy and Frames YouTube. Please subscribe to it. We would greatly appreciate that. We are really moving towards more digital content for 2023 and moving forward. So it's going to be a great follow. You'll see a lot of information on there. I've done some videos the last couple of weeks on DFS lineups. I'll do some again tomorrow, where basically it'll be shorter versions of what we're going to go over today. And then obviously follow us on social media. We'd appreciate you following the Daily Fix Show at the Daily Fix Show on Twitter, as well as at Fantasy and Frames. Check out the website, fantasyandframes.com. And some exciting news for the Fantasy and Frames family. We have added a whole bunch of new folks. We're very excited. We basically doubled in size in the last week. One of them is my man Gator J, who just, as you can see, is up on the board right now. If you're streaming live, said, hey, we are live. We are really excited. I was in the onboard interview with a lot of these guys, some really talented dudes that are hungry and want to give great content. And I'm excited to work with them. So, again, great things ahead for Fantasy and Frames in 2023. Last week, don't really have to recap too much, but I do want to brag for a second that we pounded the table about Travis Kelce being the guy who needs to be in every lineup, and hello, he scored the most points. So bully for us once again. And then for this week, and then for the Super Bowl, we're going to obviously have to do some, different things. Last week we did lineups because of the smaller slate. We've got even smaller slates this week. So what me and Joe are going to do is we'll give you a lineup for the 2 games, a traditional one, and then we're going to give you a captain's lineup for each game, trying to help you win as much money as possible in the last few games that you can do DFS on. So we'll get right into that. Do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? Let's start with a 2-game slate.
Yeah, let's do the full 2 game. I'll lead off this time. We'll change it up a bit. For quarterback, it's Joe Burrow for me at 6,800. I think for me, there's 2 quarterbacks that I can see the Purdy argument. I'll just lead off there, just based on savings. But as far as the guys, I feel, it's just the value because if you take Brock Purdy at 5,300, that frees up a lot of stuff compared to doing a Burrow, Hurts, or Mahomes. But for me, it's Burrow or Hurts, because I think San Francisco is going to be doing an even more run-oriented offense than we saw last week. I mean, I think if you look back at, the multiple playoffs with Jimmy G, Kyle Shanahan went harder into the run game in the playoffs. He was like, I trust my scheming of the run game. I trust our O-line more than I trust my quarterback. And there are some things that you could argue like, I feel better about Purdy than Jimmy G maybe. But I think Kyle Shanahan is very much going to be in that feeling, especially against this defense where you've got 2, I don't know if they both made the Pro Bowl this year, but these are Pro Bowl caliber corners on the outside. And if you want to attack the Eagles defense, generally you're going the run game. So for me, it came down to Hurts because I think the Niners are the opposite. If you want to attack them, you want to pass. But we've seen Joe Burrow against this Kansas City defense, and they're 3-0 for a reason. Joe Burrow has been successful the last 2 years. He's thrown at least 2 touchdowns in all 3 of those games. He only has 1 interception in that time. The end of the regular season last year was when he had the massive 400-yard game where he and Chase just went off. I don't know if you should bank on that happening again, but he's been consistent against this Kansas City defense. So he's my guy. The running back slate, I feel not as confident in this group versus probably any other grouping that we have to pick from. And that's kind of the reason why I'm going Christian McCaffrey at 8,000 to lead off. I just think you look at all these other guys. I mean, you and I, Jerick McKinnon, we were all in last week. I think he was in like all of our lineups that we said. He scores 2.5 points.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
going back to the well, Joe. I'll go ahead and tell you.
I was going to say, I am too. Like, I'll spoil that now too. He's my second running back in this lineup. But it's not like I feel incredibly confident there. I will say there's an argument for the Bengals backs. I guess explicitly Joe Mixon, unless you're just going to bank on him getting hurt in this game. Because the last 2 times that the Bengals have faced Kansas City in the playoffs last year, Mixon went for 100 yards. In the regular season this year, he missed that game. Samaje Perine went for over 100 yards. So you've seen the Bengals have that success. We've seen them get the bonus. I'd rather just spend up and get Christian McCaffrey, though, because this guy, last week was a bad game for him. He scored 17.7. Since coming to San Francisco, he has 1 game under 10 points. And then he has 5 games with 24 or more points. It's not close between him and the other running backs. And again, I just look at this Eagles defense. And again, I think this is the best pass defense in the NFL. They have 4 guys who have 10 sacks. They have awesome corners. They have good safeties. And then you look at the run game, 4.5 yards on adjusted line yards. That's 26th or 22nd in the NFL. I mentioned last week, short yardage situations, 3rd, 4th downs, goal line, 2 yards or less to go. They allow people to convert 80% of the time. That's worse than the NFL. So if you get in that short yardage situation, they're allowing people to pound it through. And then the other thing with them is not awesome at defending running backs in the pass game. They don't give up a ton of yardage. But again, I don't have – let me pull up the touchdown numbers. But DVOA, which again is accounting for how often you get targeted, how often you score, has them 24th in the NFL against running backs. You compare that to what they are against wide receivers. Number 1 wide receivers, they're the 2nd best defense. Number 2 wide receivers are the 4th best defense. And I don't even know how much you want to get into number 3 wide receivers because San Francisco isn't huge on that. Although I believe you're going to bring up Juwan Jennings potentially at some point in this pod based on our conversations earlier.
Oh, he's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the Eagles and I say, if you want to attack them, you're attacking them on the ground. And then I have Christian McCaffrey, who's the best running back in the NFL. Jerick McKinnon, I think, that was his worst game he's had in 2 months. He's paid off when we've ridden him. And I also just think if you've got a hobbled Patrick Mahomes, you're probably going to try and get the ball out of his hands a little bit quicker. He's maybe not throwing downfield as often. And that's just all Jerick McKinnon stuff. I mean, his receiving this year was out of this world until last week when he had no catches. So I'm going to buy low on Jerick McKinnon this week. I just think this is the bounce back. This is a game built for him. I do think, we've seen this Bengals defense. They're very malleable. That's kind of their greatest strength is they're trying to force you out of your comfort zones. And then I think they'll take advantage with some talented defensive ends to try to get after Patrick Mahomes. I especially expect if they blitz, they're blitzing up the middle because they don't think Mahomes can roll out. So again, get the ball out of his hands quick. That means we're going Jerick McKinnon. Wide receiver, this is kind of just the don't fight it. Jamar Chase. You and I were kind of down on him last week. If not for a bobble that half the people who watched it thought it was still a touchdown, then he scores 2 touchdowns last week and has 23 points. And he still scores 17.
To him before I set my lineups, Joe. He was in every one of them last week. So.
Okay, well, good on you. I put him in one lineup, and the rest of that lineup was not great because that was kind of my just against my own picks lineup. So he was the one who did awesome, and the rest of it wasn't awesome.
I looked at his targets, and I was like, he's the one receiver that I knew last week was just going to get peppered.
Yeah, he's been incredibly consistent with the targets. I mean, unsurprisingly, he's Jamar Chase. But if you go back, he hasn't had fewer than 8 targets since week 4. And granted, he missed some games in there, but that's plenty of game time to see that Joe Burrow knows where to throw the ball here. And then I looked up the last 3 games. Combined stats for him, Higgins, and Boyd against this Kansas City team.
It's good.
Total targets between the other two, 37. Total targets for him, 29. Total receptions for the other two, 24. Chase, 24. Total yardage for the other two, 313 yards. Chase, 417 yards. Touchdowns, the other two, 2 touchdowns. Chase, 4 touchdowns. So based on the last 3 games that we've seen these teams play, Jamar Chase is far and away the guy you're going with. And again, if you're going with Burrow, you're obviously pairing him with at least one of the receivers. So if you're going Burrow, you have to have Chase in your lineups. And even more helpful is the Kansas City defense when you go up against number 1 wide receivers.
31st, right?
31st in DVOA against number 1 wide receivers. They are 10th against number 2s. They are 8th against other wide receivers. So, yeah, it's not new. 81 yards a game is also 30th. Only Detroit and Minnesota were worse. So, yeah, this is not some anomaly where like, oh, Chase happened to have good games against them. No, this defense this season has consistently been bad against number 1s. We've seen over 3 games Jamar Chase is awesome against them. We've also just seen Jamar Chase be awesome. So I don't for me, he's like the top play of the week.
Over Kelsey.
The Kelsey. Yeah, to me, Kelsey was the play last week. Chase is the play this week. So all in on that one. My number 2 wide receiver, I'm going Devonta Smith.
These lineups are going to be similar, Joe. I love it.
Because, yeah, again, I think San Francisco is not the team that you're trying to attack on the ground. I wish I'd screenshot this tweet I saw a couple days ago because I tried to look for it earlier and I couldn't remember who actually tweeted it. But they mentioned that over the course of this season, Shane Steichen's play calling in the first half tends to skew towards smartly whatever he considers the weakness on the other team. And they mentioned, you look at the San Francisco team, they're really good overall. DVOA, they're 5th against the pass, but they're 2nd against the run. So to me, you're trying to attack their corners. If you're just, again, a big part of that passing DVOA number 2 is outside of Philadelphia, I think this is the best pass rush in the NFL. But if you can do some things, you've got a mobile quarterback, you can move the pocket. I think that opens up opportunities to attack San Francisco down the field. That has been their weakness this season is passing down the field. We also just saw CeeDee Lamb be like the one person who could do anything against them. But yeah, on short passes, DVOA, 1st in the NFL. Deep passes, 24th. Now, A.J. Brown admittedly has, I believe, 6 more deep ball targets on the year than Devonta Smith. But again, I think when you look at what the San Francisco defense does, like most elite defenses, they try to take away that number 1 option. Against number 1 wide receivers, 4th in DVOA, against number 2s, 18th. Against other wide receivers, which I guess if you want to take that Quez Watkins flyer, 30th in DVOA.
Let's not get carried away.
Now, they do get I mean, yeah, I think Quez Watkins is a desperation play if you're doing just that game. I don't think you want him in the 2-game lineup. But again, yeah, I just look at that and I say I think this team is going to focus on A.J. Brown. And that leaves stuff open for Devonta Smith. And he's a guy who's consistently gotten it done. I mean, this is someone who's had at least 10 points in every game since week 13. 6 for 61 last week. I mean, really the only thing that stopped their pass game last week was that the Giants were down 20 points immediately. So otherwise, this was going to be a massive game for him, probably for AJ, for Jalen. But yeah, I think this game rides on the Eagles passing game. And so I'm going with Devonta Smith. 4,700 Juju Smith-Schuster is my 3rd wide receiver. This is kind of the one where I was just kind of who fits into my lineup. I definitely need a Kansas City person because I do not have Travis Kelce in this lineup. I don't feel awesome about it.
In you, Joe.
I don't feel awesome about it, but I had to make a choice. I knew I was taking Chase. I knew I wanted Devonta Smith. I feel good about that one. And so I either needed McCaffrey or Kelce. I could only fit one in. I feel better about rolling with some of the other tight ends than I do rolling with some of the other running backs. And so that's kind of where it came down, which meant I had to have a Kansas City wide receiver because I'm not going to not have any Kansas City pass catcher besides Jerick McKinnon. And so I'm going with Juju in this one. I wish I had some like great argument for like why Juju is especially going to be potent in this game. But for me, it really just boils down to I think Cincinnati focuses on trying to take away Kelce as much as they can. Obviously, that's what a lot of teams do. So I'm not saying don't play Travis Kelce. because that's everyone's strategy against Kansas. But I'm just banking on, the Bengals this year. We talked about it last week, although then they shut down the entire Bills offense. But Chidobe Awuzie is out. This is not a team that has killer cornerbacks. I will say Mike Hilton is very good in the slot. But yeah, I just think if Juju Smith-Schuster is going up against Eli Apple on the outside and he gets a reasonable opportunity, I feel good about that because I don't think Eli Apple's very good at playing cornerback in the NFL. So, yeah, I think you have to have someone from Kansas City in your lineup. You should probably have someone from every team. Again, it's a four teams are left. You should probably have someone from every team in your lineup, but you have to have a Kansas City person no matter what Patrick Mahomes' ankle looks like. So I'm throwing Juju in. Tight end, we got to go a little cheap here. Hayden Hurst, 3,000.
Wow. These lineups are going to be similar, Joe. I love it.
I think, he's kind of the forgotten man sometimes, but last week showed up 5 for 59, a touchdown. The week before against Baltimore, I wouldn't really count the previous week, although he had 4 catches in the finale against Baltimore. But in the playoffs, when it mattered, 4 receptions, 45 yards. So I think we've seen he's a reasonably talented guy. Like I said earlier, Kansas City, very good against 2 and 3 wide receivers. So I'm just kind of banking there on they're not going to be able to cover Chase. 19th in DVOA against tight ends, so they do give up stuff to tight ends. And that's kind of the key to Hurst. I think that's why he's able to have success, especially in this offense, is you're so preoccupied with the rest of the receivers running out there. But you just can't do much with Hurst. You've got some linebacker on him, and if he's in that one-on-one situation, or if he can just find a soft spot in his zone, he can make plays. Guy I really like, George Kittle. I'm scared off of the wide receivers in the San Francisco game. Otherwise, granted, if anyone can scheme them open up against the best secondary in the NFL, it's Kyle Shanahan. But I would rather go with George Kittle if I'm playing a pass catcher against the Philly defense. And listen, Philly defense, not exactly bad against tight ends. 6th in DVOA. They give up 49 yards a game to tight ends. That is directly on the league average. But if you're telling me something is directly on the league average when it comes to the passing game against this Philly defense, that's a win. Because, again, I think this is the best defense in the NFL against the pass.
I don't have him, but don't you think it is fair to say Debo is somebody to consider? Because I think he may run a lot more than we've seen recently.
That's the key with Debo is you can't rule him out because, he might have 6 carries for 70 yards. And then also, again, Shanahan's going to try to scheme stuff.
Yep.
Oh, but he's not asking, Debo. He will ask Ayuk to do this, but I think in this game, you're not going to see a lot of it. He's not asking guys to get open downfield 20 yards. He's saying, I'm going to scheme you open. I'm going to get the ball in your hands. I want you on the move. So this is the rare team where I'm not all out against the receivers, but if I have the choice, I'm riding with Kittle.
Yeah.
I know on PFF's advantage against tight ends, unsurprisingly, the leader once again was Travis Kelce because I think, he's the automatic huge advantage every week. But, again, Dallas Goedert, maybe the 3rd or 4th best tight end, if we're taking, Mark Andrews after Kelce and Kittle. They have his advantage is 1% this week because San Francisco has the best pair of inside linebackers in the NFL coverage. Hayden Hurst is at 5%, which is reasonable. Kelsey's at 58% because he's like a god among men. But Kittle's at 30%. That's a big advantage because, the wide receiver one, if anyone's ever heard me talk about that one, and I'll say, this guy is 100. The wide receiver one tends to be, there's no negatives. It's a 0 to 100. For the tight end score, for whatever reason, 0 is the baseline. So 58 is basically an 100, and then a 30 is like an 80 if we're converting. So that's a big advantage they see him having over Kazir White, the other Philly linebackers, who aren't bad in coverage, but George Kittle's awesome. And the other thing, too, is we've seen over the last 2 months, once Purdy came in, Kittle took off. From week 15 to now, the opening game against Seattle, only game where he didn't break 12 points. So I love him, especially at the 5,200 price tag. Because, I mean, you're going to spend 500 more for Debo. You're going to spend less for Ayuk. But again, Kittle doesn't have to match up against James Bradbury on the outside, which is what Ayuk's going to be doing. So I love George Kittle. He's one of my favorite plays this week. And then defense, with this lineup, I had the choice. It's the Bengals or it's Kansas City. I will say, if you have the money at the end of filling out your lineup, I would rather have the two teams that are just constantly getting sacks in San Francisco and Philly. But I hate agreeing with the public when it's against Kansas City because it scares me. But if you're telling me this Bengals team that I think is like dead even with Kansas City just in general, and now they get Patrick Mahomes on a hobbled ankle, I got to go with them. So it's Cincinnati at 2,300 for my defense.
All right. Well, we got a lot of similarities. Which is
that's good news.
Because good.
I was going to say last week, my one lineup that won money was I tried to build a consensus lineup. So anyone who was in both of our picks, and that was the only one that won money. So I liked that you're leading off with a lot of agreement.
All right, let's go through this, although you're dead wrong about Kelsey. He needs to be in every lineup. Joe Burrow, 6,800, is also my QB in 3 games versus Kansas City in his career, 982 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick. He also has a rushing touchdown and 81 yards, which is a big deal. He's rushed for at least 15 yards in all 3 games, so I think he will get some rushing yards against them. He scored 18.5 points or more in all 3. In those games, averaging 327 yards per, 2.6 touchdowns to 0.33 picks. Again, the 27 rushing yards per, 32.6 points per game on DK. And again, he had 30 points or more in 2 of 3. So it's not like that one monster game last year is where all that accounts from, which I think is important to remember. It's not just a one-hit wonder. His playoff numbers, though, it's really, he's Joe Montana 2.0 is what it feels like at this point. 259.3 yards per game, 68% completion, 7.4 yards per attempt, 1.3 touchdowns to 0.3 interceptions per game. This is the big thing, 98.4 QBR. He just doesn't really make mistakes. He's had 240 yards or more in 5 of 6, multi-touchdowns in 3 of 6, averaging over 10 yards per on the ground, which, again, he seems to run a little bit more than he does in the regular season in the playoffs, which that's just free points. We'll take them. And I just trust him by far the most among QBs. And that is not just because Mahomes is injured. Obviously, that plays a big factor. But at this point, I do. I trust Burrow more in big games than Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes has had some questionable games. Burrow, even in the Super Bowl last year when he had no time, same deal in the Tennessee game, he just keeps coming. It's really impressive. I think he's arguably the best QB in football right now. I also went with Jerry McKinnon, 5,400.
Well, can I pause you just real quick?
Yeah.
I gotta know what was the questionable game by Mahomes?
Are you kidding me? Did you see him last year versus Cincinnati in the second half?
Oh, that's true. That's true.
He was horrible.
Well, that's like the only one. I mean, he didn't. But
he was horrible. It was bad.
He was still awesome for one half. I would just keep that in mind. It's not like he's ever just totally shit.
But I'm just saying, nothing came out that he was injured or anything. And as the Bengals came, he folded, and it was really the first time.
That's true.
And he didn't play great in the Tampa Bay Super Bowl either. That he just got absolutely
that game was impossible though.
You say that, but Burrow had a good game against Tennessee, getting sacked 9 times.
Yeah, but part of that was that Burrow does have a tendency to take more sacks than he should, which he's improved on over the second half of the season. But I mean, that Tampa Bay Super Bowl, I don't think I've ever seen someone under duress in a game of that magnitude where you'd think this team's too good to have a game.
I will say, though, Burrow got hit a ton in the Rams Super Bowl last year as well. He did a great job. I think he got it out on an average of 2.3 seconds or whatever.
Burrow is a beast. He is a beast.
So anyway, apples to oranges. All right. I also went with Jerick McKinnon as one of my running backs, 5,400. He had 14 points in the regular season matchup versus the Bengals earlier this year. Obviously, a very disappointing 2.5 last week versus Jacksonville for people like me and Joe who had him in our lineups. But I think that might lead to low ownership or lower ownership this week, which I am good with, because if you look at it, last year in the playoffs, he scored 12.5 points or more in all 3 games. He averaged 50 yards on the ground, almost 5 receptions per. That's just 3 points. We'll take them. Over 50 yards per game in receiving. And just in their 2 playoff games, Cincy has allowed 2 running backs 13 receptions for 108 yards and a score. And when you include those 2 playoff games, in their last 10, running backs have caught 4 more passes in 10 straight. Again, that is free points, and McKinnon is the most likely running back to do that. 5 or more receptions for running backs in 8 of Cincinnati's last 10 games, 6 or more in 4 of those 10. I think he's a really safe play. He's got a high floor, and at least in that 12-point range, what he's averaged last year. And we've seen McKinnon has the ability, maybe like no running back other than McCaffrey left to he can go bananas. If he has one of those games where he ends up scoring twice, catches 6-7 balls. I'm going with Joe Mixon for my other back, 6,500. Current playoffs, he's averaging 6.5 points per game coming off the 23-point game last week. But the big thing is he just seems to be better in the playoffs. In 2021, he averaged almost 66 yards on the ground, 4.5 receptions per. Again, free points, take them. 5 targets per, 26.75 receiving yards, averaged 15.25 points on DK. I mean, remember, they played 4 games last year, so that's a substantial number. KC in their last 9 games has struggled with the run. Jags last week, 118 yards and a touchdown on 16 carries. The Seahawks a few weeks ago, 117 yards on 28 carries. The Chargers had 98 yards on 25 carries. In the first matchup, Joe alluded to it, Mixon was out, but Perrine ran for 106 yards on 21 carries. So the Bengals have proven they can run on this Chiefs D. And he just runs more in the playoffs. He averaged 14.6 carries per game in the regular season this year, averaged 17 per game in the playoffs last year, and right now is almost averaging 16 per game in the 2 this year. So he's getting a few more opportunities. I like that. I am also going with Jamar Chase. There's not really much else that I can add to what you said, other than just he is averaging in 6 postseason games, 9 targets, 6.5 receptions, 85 yards per game, over 13 yards per reception, and almost 20 points per game on DK. And again, we're getting into a big sample size. He's played 6 games. I also am going with Devontae Smith, 6,800. San Francisco's weakness on defense is the secondary on DK. Again, Joe alluded to it. It wasn't just Lamb, though. Lamb had 10 for 117 on 13 targets. Metcalf, the week before, 10 for 136, 2 touchdowns on 13 targets. Lockett also had 6 receptions at that game. Last game of the season, A.J. Green, 3 for 91 and a touchdown on 5 targets. Week 15, Devontae Adams, 7 for 153 with 2 touchdowns on 11 targets. The week before that versus Washington, McLaurin and Dotson both had 5 receptions, both had over 70 yards. They both had a touchdown. Receivers can eat versus this team. So you might ask me why Smith over Brown, because I have the money in this lineup that if I want to make the change, I can.
Oh, so you're straight up. You're straight up taking it.
I'm straight up taking them. There's actually a few different. I got a little flexibility, so that way if people want to make changes with this lineup, I'm going to give you some options for that. And also I'll get to the reason why I like doing that in this slate. But Brown tweaked his hip. He's not 100%. But honestly, that's not the main reason. Over the last 10 games, Smith has just been better. The last 10 games, Brown, 4.8 receptions per, 7.6 targets, 80 yards per game, 5 touchdowns, 16.5 points on DK. Devontae Smith over those same 10 games, 6.1 receptions, more receptions, 9.3 targets, more targets, 81.2 yards, more yards, 6 touchdowns, more touchdowns, and 19.48 points per game on DK. So across the board, Devontae has been the better wide receiver on this Eagles offense, and he's cheaper. He's $200 cheaper. So that's why I'm going with him. I'm going with Juwan Jennings right now at 3,300, but again, I have enough to pivot to Tyler Boyd at 3,800 or Kadarius Toney at 3,700, which I both of those I see the reasoning. The reason right now I'm not really considering Boyd is just the fact I don't want to overload on Bengals. I already have Mixon, Burrow, and Chase. I also have Hurst coming up in my lineup. Now, Tony's the one I'm really considering. He scored 7.8 points or more in 4 straight, double digit in his last 3. Last week, and arguably the biggest game of the season, saw a season high 7 targets, matched his high in 6 touches. He had 5 receptions and a rush. I can't decide if an injured Mahomes increases or decreases his value, because he's one of those players that short, quick passes, he can make a lot out of those. So say Mahomes can't move and has to get rid of the ball quicker, I'm thinking that may actually up Tony's value. So I may end up pivoting to that. But the reason I'm going with Jennings right now is I have a lot of chalk, and I don't think Jennings is going to be obviously high owned. He's going to be low owned. And he is the wide receiver for the 49ers who lines up in the slot more than any other, 43% of the time. Samuels is 16%, Ayuk 12%, Kittle 13%. Eagles have a great pass D, but they struggle with slot receivers. I've been talking about this now for almost 6 weeks on the show. They give up 13.8 yards per reception to slot receivers, 13 receptions per game, and 22 touchdowns, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. Jennings has 3 or more targets in 5 of the 8 games with Purdy, 2 or more receptions in 6 of 8. And even with Samuel back from injury, he's still seeing about a 45% snap share. And I think this lineup can really go off if I end up going with Jennings. And I will tell you, I may pivot to Tony. I'm not sure. But if Jennings, say, scores a touchdown, this lineup is on, because I feel really good about a lot of the other plays in here. And I was able to get Kelsey, Mixon, Chase, and Smith with Burrow all in this lineup. I went Hayden Hurst 3,000 for my tight end, 4 more receptions in 3 straight, seen 6 targets in both playoff games. Big thing for me, 5 red zone targets in his last 3 games. That is more than he saw in the previous 8 weeks. So to me, that is significant, especially because, again, these were all big games. His true catch rate of 98.2% is huge. He's a very reliable receiver in big games. Burrow can trust if he makes a good throw to him, he is not going to drop the ball. And the Chiefs are 15th on DK versus tight ends. But in their last 6, Joe, they've been just flat out bad, allowing 6.5 receptions to tight ends. They've given up 5+ receptions in 5 of those 6 games to tight ends, giving up 53.16 yards per game during that stretch. 40+ yards in 4 of 6, at least 30 in all 6. So that's kind of his floor, because Hurst is really the only tight end that catches passes in this offense. And they've given up 4 touchdowns in that span, 1 in at least 3 of the last 6. So I don't think Kansas City is really the 15th best defense versus tight ends. They just were better at the beginning of the season. I think teams have realized you can really exploit them here, because as Joe said, they're very good against number 2 and 3 receivers. So I really like Hurst at 3,000. I think he's a great value. I'm not going away from Kelsey. There ain't no way in hell. 7,800 flex. I spoke about his playoff success last week, and then he went out and had 14 catches for 98 yards and 2 scores over his last 7 playoff games. 9.7 receptions. He's had 8+ in 6 of those 7 games. 108 yards per game. 90+ in all 7. 8 touchdowns. He scored a touchdown in 6 of 7 of those games, averaging 28.97 points on DK in the last 7 playoff games. He scored 24 or more in 6 of 7. And oh, by the way, in the one he didn't, he scored 23.6. So he scored at least 23.6 in 7 straight playoff games. There's no way I'm benching that guy against a Bengals defense that is not good versus tight ends. In their last 8 games, excluding New England, who practically doesn't have tight ends with the way that they use them with the production and stuff, so I didn't count them. Knox, 5 for 65 yards, 7 targets. Andrews, 5 for 73, 10 targets. Isaiah Likely, 8 for 103, 13 targets. Njoku, 7 for 59 on 12 targets. Kelsey, ironically, did not have a good game, which is why I think he's going to have a monster game. 4 for 56 on 6 targets. Titans tight end, 6 for 65 on 9 targets. Remember, that's Austin Hooper and a rookie. And Pat Freiermuth, 8 for 79 and 12 targets. That's their last 8 games. I think Kelsey feasts. I think he should be in every lineup. And then I'm also going with the Bengals defense at 2,300. I think that it's the safest play, which is insane to say versus the Chiefs. I just don't know what's going to happen in the San Francisco-Philadelphia game. You could tell me that Philadelphia ends up jumping up early
100%.
and runs away with it. It wouldn't shock me. You could tell me San Francisco could just run it down Philadelphia's throat. That wouldn't surprise me either. I think Kansas City, especially if Mahomes is limited in his mobility, which it's hard to believe he's not with the injury that he had, it's going to be difficult for him. But what I like the most about this gives me $500 left over. So I can make a shift to Tony or Boyd. If I decide, you know what, even though Smith's been better the last 10 weeks, I'm going to throw A.J. Brown in instead of him. I can. Or what I really like about it, I said this last week, in these smaller slates, as long as it's not more than $500, $600, leave it open. It makes it a lot less likely you're going to share lineups with a lot of people when there's not a lot of options. So it gives me a little bit more capital in my lineup because I know a lot of people aren't going to be as dumb as me to go, I'm just going to leave $500 on the table. So that is my 2-game slate. Let's get on to the showdown. You want to do the NFC first, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do the NFC first.
All right. I'll go ahead and do this one first. We'll let you start with the AFC. I went back and forth, but I'm going with my boy. I'm going to go with Jamar Chase. I went back and forth on this. Well, that's what I was thinking. I almost swapped right in the middle of the podcast there. But I'm going to go with Jamar Chase. He's 15,600. I laid out all the reasons. Give me T. Higgins, 8,400. It's kind of insurance if, say, Chase ends up not having that great game. I don't see any way the Chiefs stop both of them. So that's insurance. I talked about Hayden Hurst at 5,200. Travis Kelce at 11,000. Again, I'm not sitting him in any lineup. Kadarius Toney, 4,800. I talked about his success recently, so I like throwing him in that lineup at 4,800. And I'm going to go with Piron at 4,600. Last week he saw work like he did, and he had a great game versus Kansas City week 1. And there could be a chance that they come out and just decide especially if they can run the ball well, which they did last year versus them, we're going to try to run it on Kansas City. You know what I'm saying? Try to control the clock, shorten the game, which makes sense. You're on the road. But you may go, Keith, you don't have Burrow or Mahomes in your lineup? Yeah, you're right. I don't. This is, again, it's a 1-game slate. Everybody's going to have Burrow and Mahomes. I like my chances that maybe both of them don't have great games. And I would rather have those 2-star receivers for Cincinnati and Kelce to counteract that, who I think are just as likely to have 20-plus points as either Burrow or Mahomes, with Mahomes being hurt. And again, Burrow has been great, but he hasn't been putting up unbelievable numbers. Cincinnati has been a lot more methodic, kind of, long drives, moving the ball down the field, moving the chains. So I'm kind of going away from what you would think. Don't get me wrong. Some of this is just, devil's advocate type deal where I'm trying to have a lineup that I know a lot of people won't have. But I think that this lineup has a good chance to win you some money in the showdown.
All right. I like it. Unsurprisingly, I 100% with you on the captain in this lineup. It's Jamar Chase. I think you went about the right strategy where if you want to differentiate your lineup, there are ways to do it, but I don't think messing with Jamar Chase in that captain spot is the way I want to go about it.
History's too good.
Yeah, you if
DVOA,
you're doing
everything.
It just feels like you're overthinking it if you do that. I mean, hey, it's a 1-game slate. Maybe you'll turn out to be a genius, but
right.
I'd rather stick with Chase. I'm not going to totally fade Kelce. Kelce is in my lineup at 11,000. The thing that worries me is the 2 regular season games the last 2 years against Kansas City. 9 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown combined in those 2 games, which for like the average NFL tight end, we'd be like, hey, I'll take that. Like 5 catches, 40 yards. And
he did score 23-plus points versus them in the playoffs last year.
Yeah, in the playoff game, he was 5 yards away from getting the 100-yard bonus. He had 10 receptions and he had a touchdown. So, yeah, that's why he's in this lineup.
Attaboy.
As much Lou Anarumo's, defensive schemes scare me, but not so much that I'm just not going to have Kelce in any lineups. I did go with Joe Burrow. I just want that Burrow Chase combo. And again, looking at the numbers, I just feel so much more confident in Chase versus the other Bengals receivers that I like having Burrow in. Although, yeah, I'm as always, as I state every time when you pick T. Higgins in the lineup, I'm not going to argue hard against it.
He worked for us big time in the Super Bowl last year, right? And a showdown.
It did indeed. It did indeed.
Having him as captain.
I'll actually real quick, just on the Travis Kelce one too. This lineup I made, it has room for you to swap stuff around. Like if you wanted to do Mahomes, you could do Mahomes. Although Mahomes on a bad ankle versus Kelsey, I'd rather have Kelsey. And likewise, if you decided, hey, I like Burrow even more than Chase with this lineup once we get all the way through it, you can swap that. You can keep both of them in. Burrow can be your captain. It works. Kadarius Toney, 4,800, very much the reasons you were stating earlier why you might swap to him in your 2-game lineup. I just think this is a guy they're clearly, I mean, hey, they made that trade for a reason. They want him involved in the offense. He has 3 straight games with at least 10 points on DK. Now, they're all like 10 to 12 points. It's not like he's got 10, 25, 10. But the fact that we're getting from a guy priced at 4,800, 3 straight 10-point games. And again, I think everything you said about maybe this is a game where you see more of him because you want the ball out quick in just a playmaker's hands. I like Toney for that reason.
Don't you think he's like the cheap option in this game, most likely like the only guy outside of those the 2 QBs, Mixon, Kelsey, and Chase, that I really think you could see having like 20 plus points? And what's great is you've seen it as a Giants fan. He could do it on like 5-6 touches.
Right, because like we both like the Hurst play, which is cheap, but I don't think the ceiling is the same as Kadarius Toney.
I want 12, 15 points, and I'm ecstatic.
Yeah. I decided to throw it because, again, I went with that Burrow, Chase, Kelsey combo. I did not have a lot of money. So I'm going Evan McPherson at 4,000.
I like it.
A big part, I think there's a good argument to be made, though, that you swap him out for Butker. I just kind of, I feel a little more confident based on the fact he kicked so well in last year's playoffs and everything. McPherson is cheaper. Again, with this lineup, you have the ability to swap. It's only a $200 difference. I will say the best argument for Butker, who only has made 75% of his kicks this year, I believe on Outsiders numbers, they've lost more on kicking, which it wasn't all Butker because he did miss a game.
Right.
And the kicking was atrocious in the games he missed. But this was like a bottom 3 team in value on kicking this year. But Butker, historically, 90% prior to this season. He's still at 88% for his career. He is a good kicker. And I think the upside on the kickers in this game, both these coaches, not super aggressive on 4th downs. Andy Reid is the most conservative coach left when it comes to 4th downs. And the Kansas City defense has been very good in the red zone.
Yep.
Whereas, we get to the other game, Sirianni's going for like every 4th down that's reasonable, which is what he should do because he has the best O-line in football and he has a mobile quarterback. That's how you should play. I mean,
he also has to live up to Peterson, his predecessor, right? Where it's like,
exactly.
Don't go for it, you're chicken shit.
Because, in this game, Kansas City, by DVOA, 6th best offense in the red zone. So unsurprisingly, they're great. Cincinnati's 8th, though, on defense. So that is a defense that tightens up. Kansas City's defense in the red zone, not strong, 26th. So you could go argue either way there. I just, again, I have the Bengals winning this game. I've seen McPherson make the kicks when it counts. So that's why I went with him. But a lot of good reasons to go with Butker. And then my last guy, this is just kind of the dart throw.
Yeah.
Marquez Valdez-Scantling at 3,600.
I like it.
And it's simple. He runs deep.
He's the big play guy.
He's the big play guy. When you go on the season, 20 deep targets. That's 24th in the NFL.
Wow.
I mean, this guy is
number 3 receiving option.
Right. At best, the 3rd wide receiver on this team when you count Kelsey, as you should, as a wide receiver. And even McKinnon, I guess, his target share is higher. So, this has got a guy who is a relative afterthought who's in the top 25 on deep targets on the season. So, Cincinnati's defense has been very good at preventing deep plays. It's a well-coached team. But if I've got to do the dart throw in this game, you could also go with the defenses there. I don't feel that confident in either defense racking up points, though. So, I'd rather say, hey, if Marquez Valdez-Scantling catches a 60-yard touchdown, cool, I just got 13 points, and he's justified everything. So that's why he was my dart throw. Obviously, hey, at that under 4,000
you have to, and showdowns,
you
have to take a chance.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'd rather take one on the big play guy. So that's my lineup. Obviously, you and I agree on a lot. I think Chase and Kelsey in the showdowns, to me, those are the 2 that have to be in your lineup.
Don't you agree, too, that don't get cute. A lot of people will try to get that median price range or really save on a captain play, which I'm about to do in the next game. But I mean, typically I tell people that you should take the high price guy that you're sure on, because they're going to score so many points and they're getting that 1.5 extra, the 0.5 extra, I should say, that it's worth spending on it. And to your point, because you have a kicker, I don't have a kicker or defense though. If you're confident in a kicker or defense, the great thing about it is they're usually going to get at least some points, to where when you're taking sometimes these cheaper guys, like we both did, they can have a goose egg, to where usually the kickers and the defense are going to at least score something. If you get lucky and the kicker kicks 3 field goals or there's a defensive touchdown, now you're onto something. So don't shy away from those. It's just something that I will remind people. All right, let's move to the NFC. What you got there, Joseph?
All right, so like you just said, I'm rolling the dice here on a more of a mid-tier guy.
I hope we picked the same guy. You went with Kittle, maybe?
I did go with Kittle.
Okay. It's not as cheap as I went then.
Okay. I'm guessing you went with Devonta Smith.
Nope. Cheaper.
Ooh, cheaper.
Oh, I got frisky.
I'm excited to find out. Again, to me, this is just Brock Purdy has thrown 2 touchdowns in every game he's played except for last week, which is obviously the scary thing and one of the reasons why I'm not going with the wide receivers for San Francisco in any of my lineups. But if someone's going to score that touchdown, I think it's Kittle. I mean, keep in mind.
What's he up to? Is it 7 touchdowns in the time Purdy's been or something crazy?
So the
like that?
last 2 weeks, he has not scored a touchdown. In the previous 4 games, he scored 7 touchdowns.
That's ridiculous.
So clearly, I mean, Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, not idiots. When you get in the red zone, you want to look for the giant guy who has an advantage in some aspect over whoever is covering him. So, yeah, I'm riding with Kittle because, he frees you up to do more interesting things with the rest of your lineup. Again, sticking with my previous play on the 2-game slate, I'm throwing in Christian McCaffrey, 11,400. The guy's averaging 22 points per game on the season. I should have calculated what it's been since he's been in San Francisco because I think it's even higher. But
it is.
Yeah. Again, when you look at this Eagles team and the way to attack them, like looking at PFF's numbers, they have the Eagles as the second best team coverage grade wise. They have the top pass rush grade on the season. And then they have the 14th run defense grade. So that's still good, but you're comparing it to, again, the best pass defense in the NFL or the 14th against the run. So for me, and again, 22nd when you go on outsiders numbers, adjusted line yards, give me Christian McCaffrey, who also, again, a guy who, if the Eagles do sprint off to a lead, if Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown are catching bombs and you're down 14, well, Christian McCaffrey's still catching passes. To that end, though, Jalen Hurts, 11,000. I wanted him in this one. I just think, I'll go ahead and say I also have Devonta Smith in this lineup. And when you look at what's happened against that 49ers defense recently, the Cowboys game, they did a good job limiting the pass outside of CeeDee Lamb, which isn't shocking because there's just not that much talent outside of CeeDee Lamb, which is the main thing Dallas should address and hopefully won't in the offseason. But the previous 4 games that they played, they gave up 8 touchdowns to wide receivers and over 200 yards just to wide receivers in 3 of those 4 games. The only game they didn't give up multiple touchdowns and over 200 yards was against the Arizona Cardinals playing a backup quarterback. Now, hey, Seattle and the Raiders, those are good offenses. Sure, that makes sense that you might give up some stuff to them. Week 16, Washington Commanders, wide receivers, 15 receptions, 205 yards, 3 touchdowns. So this is a defense, again, where the Eagles, you want to primarily attack them through the run. San Francisco, you want to attack them to the pass. You want to get in that deep passing game. Again, 24th in DVOA against the deep ball. So that, to me, that's all Hurts. That's all Devonta Smith. And then I'm just doubling down on that run game. Eli Mitchell, 5,200 for me. I think he's a guy where, I mean, you talked about this when you were saying reasons not to go with McCaffrey, I believe, last week, is that Elijah Mitchell stays involved. This is a guy who double-digit points the previous 2 games prior to last week. I mean, he averages 8.5 points on the season. And his worst game was week 1, which was a game McCaffrey did not play. Then Mitchell got hurt.
That was the mud game, too, if you remember.
Yeah, that's the mud game. So in the 6 games he's played since the mud game, all of them have been with Christian McCaffrey out there. And he hasn't gone under 5. He's had 9.8 or more in 3 of those 6 games. He's a guy who's, again, he stays involved. And I think they're going hard on the run game. So I'm taking both running backs. No, it's also on the off chance. Like Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. I like the Elijah Mitchell play. And then, yeah, I'm just kind of going Quez Watkins just because I think we're going to see more 3 wide than we normally see from Philadelphia, because I do think they're going to be hyper aggressive in trying to attack San Francisco through the pass. And, you know, he hasn't done much lately, but he did have that stretch weeks 10 through 12. Granted, I think Dallas Goedert was hurt during some of that. He had 3 straight double-digit games at one point this season. It's not like he's someone incapable of playing well in this offense. And also, you know, he cost $1,800 and I had $100 left at the end. So there weren't a ton of options here in the under 2,000 range. But yeah, I just felt like I really wanted Hurts, Smith, McCaffrey, and Kittle in my lineup. So I went Kittle as my captain because I wanted all those guys. And then going cheap, I went Mitchell and Watkins. What do you got?
All right. So you kind of gave it away a little bit there. I'm going Elijah Mitchell as my captain. 78.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I think there's a very good chance the Niners run it down the Eagles' throat. And just to let y'all know, since Mitchell has came back, CMC has only out-touched him or out-rushed him 25-19. In the Chargers game earlier this year, Mitchell out-rushed him 18-14. Cardinals game out-rushed him 9-7. Saints game, Mitchell was outrushed by McCaffrey 11-7, but that was the game that Mitchell got hurt. Cardinals game, CMC outrushed him 10-5, but that was the first game back for Mitchell. And then obviously in the first playoff game, 15-9. Last week, Mitchell actually had more carries. I think that there's a good chance Mitchell ends up with more carries than CMC. For whatever reason, they like running him more. Obviously, CMC's much more valuable in the passing game. He has a much higher upside. But by doing this and going with Mitchell, I'm then allowed to play Jalen Hurts, George Kittle, CMC, A.J. Brown, and then throw in Juwan Jennings. This game, again, to me is very confusing. There's no guy in this game that I feel like 1,000% they're going to go off. It wouldn't shock me if Hurts has a great game. It wouldn't shock me if Hurts has a terrible game. It wouldn't shock me if CMC has a great game. It wouldn't shock me if he has a terrible game. But the good news is by going with this, which I do think it's likely that the Niners are going to be able to run on this Eagles defense. Shanahan's as good as anybody in the world at scheming, rushing, and with the 2 backs, I think they're going to use them both, which is what they've done. Again, 25-19 since he's returned, and 5 of those rushes that CMC has the advantage was his first game back, and they basically were just getting Mitchell his legs back. I just think it gives you a lot of flexibility. Again, I'm throwing in Jennings into that lineup. I don't want to tell you the wrong number. So right now I have 400 left over in the AFC one. I have 400 left over in the NFC one, which again gives me flexibility. Nice. I threw in Brown over Smith in this game just because I have Smith in my 2-game slate. That's going to be my lineup in pretty much every contest because I feel pretty good about it. I don't want to double dip. I feel like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, I mean, even, with me going through the numbers, there's not a huge difference over the last 10 games. Just Devontae Smith's been slightly better. And I feel a lot better about having Brown in this one, hearing you say that where the Niners are really weak is down the field, which I know Devontae Smith's a good down the field receiver too, but come on, A.J. Brown is like the king of 3 receptions, 120 yards, and 2 touchdown games. But I just love by putting in Mitchell, I get Brown, Hurts, Kittle, and McCaffrey. We've talked about, obviously, McCaffrey, the reasons for him. I agree with you with Kittle. I think he's the most safest receiver option out of the Niners. And then the Jennings again is just, I think the Eagles' weakness is in the slot. Jennings lines up by far the most in the slot of any of the receivers, Kittle, Ayuk, Samuel. And I just think that maybe he scores a touchdown or he has a big play. I mean, he caught one of the biggest passes in the game last week. But it just gives you some flexibility. And I will say, normally, again, I am totally against going cheap. I know a lot of people will throw like a defense in, which I agree with that for a captain's lineup. If it's like, for instance, the Cowboys versus the Titans, what was that, week 15 or 16, when the Titans just punted on the game? We knew that I think Dobbs was starting. It was just a terrible matchup. Okay, yeah, then go with your Cowboys defense. Typically, though, I like going with a stud for your captain. But in this game, because I don't know who the stud is, like, honestly, I'm not sure. I'm going with Mitchell, and that allows me to put in 4 other guys that could end up being that stud to where if Mitchell just has a good game, I think I can still compete and make up for whatever of, say, those 4 players, or it's Devontae Smith or whoever is the captain in other people's lineups, and say they go off, I can still compete with them. So a little bit different option there. But so that brings us to the end.
Let me add one more thing just for people to consider in that one, because neither of us went with a kicker on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But like the other game, you have only a difference of $200 in the 2 kickers. Well, my strong advice would be, if you decide on a kicker in this game, which I think would be reasonable if you aren't buying in on our Elijah Mitchell stuff, you're like, hey, I want to save an extra $800 on someone else. Robbie Gould over Jake Elliott, 100%. Because, again, Sirianni, most aggressive coach in the NFL this year on 4th downs. Jake Elliott, across 17 games, counting the playoff game, he missed 1 game in the regular season. He kicked 24 field goals total.
Wow.
Since Brock Purdy came into the San Francisco lineup, I'm counting the Miami game where he took over in the first quarter. In the 8 games that he has played, Robbie Gould has kicked 21 field goals.
Shanahan's smart, right? Like, he knows I got a rookie quarterback, 7th rounder. If I can get points in the game, obviously they're not trailing hardly ever.
I think he's historically not as aggressive as you, especially because here's the thing too, that like,
Joe, you're talking to a fucking Falcons fan. I know he's not aggressive,
right?
Enough, okay.
I mean, and the ridiculous thing too is, it's like, if you could pick one coach to design you a play to gain you like 2 yards,
he's the best.
I wouldn't take anyone over Kyle Shanahan, but Kyle Shanahan, for whatever reason, does not agree with me. Yeah, Peterson would be up there. Obviously, Andy Reid's always up there. But yeah, because Shanahan, he's so good at scheming receivers open in the short areas of the field. He's so good at designing run plays. But yeah, he's not aggressive. And so, yeah, last 8 games, Robbie Gould has kicked nearly as many field goals as, I just forgot the other kicker's name. Why do I always do this? I was going to say, is it Jake Elliott?
Jake Elliott.
It is still Jake Elliott. I was going to say, I couldn't remember. That
I don't know. I actually don't even know.
It is Jake Elliott. I'm looking at the DK line. It's Jake Elliott.
Not FanDuel, Joe, is because we don't want no damn kickers.
But so, yeah. So Jake Elliott in the entire season has kicked 3 more field goals than Robbie Gould in the last 8 games.
That's insane. That's an insane.
So, yeah, the fact that they're only 200 apart, that's ridiculous. You should 100%, if you take a kicker in this game, take Robbie Gould.
All right, there will be no podcast next week because, sadly, there will be only a flag football Pro Bowl, which I am excited about that. It's better than what we've had.
Listen, if they put up a DK flag football thing, I'm going to play it. Let's just be real. I'm going to take my shot.
But I was going to say, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, I can promise you, me and Joe will do at least 1 or 2 videos from the Senior Bowl in Mobile.
Yeah.
First time meeting in person, maybe a little inebriated, who knows. I joked with Jorge yesterday that since Max Dugan's going to be there, right when I see him, I'm going to ask him at what moment did he know he was going to have the worst loss in bowl history. But I would be sure to do it in a Fantasy and Frames t-shirt. So no, I kid. But I'm really looking forward to it. So please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because you'll get to see us at the Senior Bowl. And not to mention, there's nothing wrong with a little guy love between 2 guys for the Scrubs fans out there. again, I want to welcome all the new members to Fantasy and Frames. I'm really excited about this group of guys and girls that we got coming on. I think they're going to be a great addition. And again, follow us on social media at Daily Fix. Follow Fantasy and Frames on YouTube, social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And check out the Fantasy and Frames website, which I want to give a huge shout out to Zach, who's been doing amazing graphics for us the last 5-6 weeks. And now
absolutely.
You can literally go to our article. It has the link with the video to our YouTube. It has the podcast available. And then also graphics with our plays to where if you want to be really lazy, you can just literally glance at our plays for the week. So seriously, huge thanks to Zach. Huge thanks to Jorge. I just think the presentation and stuff is so much better. And me and Joe are not smart enough to do that on our own. So we really appreciate it. But for Joe the Brain Mats, Keith Fleming, I want to wish everybody good luck in the NFC Championship and AFC Championship slates. Be sure to do as many lineups as you can, folks, because we've only got 3 games left. We'll see you guys soon.